This Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. local time in the Pacific Time Zone, we have the 20th ranked Illinois Fighting Illini, who stand at 6-1, 3-1 in Big Ten Conference play, traveling multiple time zones over to the West Coast to play in Autzen Stadium against the number one undefeated Oregon Ducks, who stand at 7-0 and 4-0 in Big Ten Conference play. Oregon opened up as a 22-point favorite. The line currently stands at Oregon minus 21.5. So the Oregon Ducks, they're getting 21.5 points at home, about a 3-touchdown favorite. They're given a 91.4% chance to win this game, according to ESPN's FPI. Before we dive into this matchup and I give you my preview and prediction, we have a really in-depth conversation about this. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video, if you could subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below, and engage with us. Share this video around to other college football fans who enjoy the channel. If you want to talk college football 24/7, and I imagine many of you do, please join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And again, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell so that you can get notified when we release new content on here. All of those things help you out a lot because you get, well, in-depth knowledge about college football and in-depth preview and prediction videos about all these different matchups. We have a great community here on College Football with Sam, and I'd love it if you would join us. So thank you very much. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, the Patreon page and the merchandise store where you can purchase memberships, or for the merchandise store, obviously, whether it's a College Football with Sam themed t-shirt in black or white, or in 18 of the 18 Big Ten team themes, because we have those, or a sweater or anything that you want, that's a way that you can support the channel monetarily if you want. But doing the things that you can do for free, those are the best things, honestly, that you can do to help out the channel. This is an interesting matchup, honestly, when you look at how both of these teams are ranked, and yet Oregon is a, well, 3-touchdown favorite, and they're given more than a 90% chance to win per FPI. They're rated well ahead of Illinois when you look at power ratings. Illinois is coming off of a 21-7 win over Michigan at home. Michigan, for whatever reason, was favored in that game. Never should have been favored. Illinois did not play their best game, though, so I guess I can kind of see the logic behind maybe thinking that Michigan would do something off of the bye and take advantage of some of Illinois' weaknesses, but they didn't. Illinois was the much better team there. And Oregon is coming off of a game against Purdue where they're obviously the much better team than Purdue. They did not play their best game, similarly to Illinois, and still won by double digits. It was on the road at Purdue on a Friday night. I picked Oregon to win. I picked them to cover, and they did. I thought that it would be a more high-scoring affair, that Oregon and Purdue would both score more points than they did. But oh well. Purdue was never pulling off that upset because they're not a well-coached team this year. Oregon is a well-coached team, and they're one of the best teams in the country. I don't know if Illinois is one of the best teams in the country, but what I can tell you is this. They are well-coached, they are disciplined, they win close games, and there's a reason why they are ranked inside of the top 25. They are not rated inside of the top 25. They are not a top 25 power-rated team. They're only viewed as 4.3 points superior to the average college football team per FPI, 6.7 points superior to the average college football team per Bill Connolly's S&P+. Oregon is only 20.5 points better than the average college football team per FPI, and they were outside of that 20 range. To be in the 20s in power ratings is indicative that you are a near elite team, maybe at the very worst great. If you're in the mid-upper 20s, that's kind of where you're an elite team, like a national championship contender or just below that. Oregon was outside of the 20s for much of the season due to their struggles against Idaho and Boise State early in the season. Now they're playing like a mid-20s power-rated team. I just don't think the analytics have really caught up to that exactly yet. S&P Plus has. They're rated as a 24.6 team, which means they're 24.6 points better than the average college football team per S&P Plus. You look at ESPN's efficiency ratings, which are really fascinating. Basically shows you how efficient, no duh, each team is on each side of the ball, offense, defense, special teams. And they measure that. I'm just pulling it up here to show you exactly how they describe it. Efficiency. Net efficiency on a 0 to 100 scale incorporates offense, defense, and special teams efficiencies into a single schedule-adjusted measure of per-play efficiency. So offensive efficiency is based on the offense's contribution to scoring margin on a per-play basis. So it's actually quite similar to points per play margin, a statistic that we'll talk about in a few seconds here, few minutes, except it divides it among how much does the offense, defense, and special teams contribute to that, well, points per play margin or scoring margin on a per play basis. I think is pretty much the same thing here. You look at Illinois and you look at Oregon, well, Oregon's 9th in offensive efficiency, 19th in defensive efficiency, 28th in special teams efficiency. And I think they're weighed down a lot by their performances early in the season. They're playing like a much better team right now. Illinois is top 50 in offensive efficiency, 49th specifically. They have the best special teams efficiency in the Big Ten. They're 52nd in defensive efficiency. I think a lot of that defensive efficiency being outside the top 50 is from their game against Purdue, where they won in pretty ugly fashion, 50 to 49. You look at the points per play margin here. Illinois has a 0.102 points per play margin per game. So that means on average, when you take a random play that Illinois has ran or has executed, I think is a better term, this season, against a random play that any of their opponents have executed this season, you take one of Illinois' plays, compare it strictly to the average play of their opponent, they on average score 0.102 more points per average one of their plays compared to the average play of the opponents that they have played. So that means on an average basis, Illinois doesn't blow out their opponents, but they do win, and sometimes even win handily. You look at Oregon's points per play margin is 0.286. That means that on an average basis, they dominate their opponents because they're scoring almost a third of a point more per one of their plays compared to one of their opponents' plays. And their game against Purdue is a prime example of that, where they shut out Purdue. So Purdue scored 0 points per play against Oregon. And then there are other games like against Idaho, for example, where Oregon outscored Idaho, and I believe they ran more plays than Idaho in that game. And there's other examples like the Boise State game, where I think Boise State ran more plays than Oregon did. I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I'm just trying to explain, well, why these things are. And this has been a very weird, strange season. Oregon did not look like a top 10 team the first 2 games of the season, but now they've evolved into a team who I think is clearly as different as night is from day, a top 5 team, and better than most teams in the Big Ten, most in the SEC, and I would say all of the teams in the Big 12, the ACC, and all other FBS conferences. You look at strength of schedule and game control. Game control basically measures how a team would do with their given schedule. So for Oregon, they're 10th in game control. That means that 9 teams would be predicted to do better with Oregon's schedule. And it's not specific to Oregon's schedule. Game control is just measured like who's the most dominant team, who's performing the best with the schedule that they have. And Oregon's 10th there. Illinois is 30th in game control. They're not even top 25 in game control, which what that really shows you is they're winning a lot of close games. When you are not highly ranked in game control, or your game control is lower than your ranking in the polls, that means that really what that means is that you're overvalued in the polls relative to the power ratings, or that you're winning a lot of close games. Washington, for example, in 2023, who beat Oregon twice, is a prime example of that. And I harp on that fact that they beat Oregon twice because you look at the numbers from 2023 and you go to the Pac-12 tab here, rest in peace to the Pac-12. Oregon was higher in average in-game win probability than Washington was. Washington was third in game control. Oregon was fifth. And you'd think that maybe they would be a little bit further apart from each other, given that Washington will beat them 2 times head-to-head. Game control, by definition, it reflects the chance that an average top 25 team would control games from start to end the way this team did, given the schedule. The only reason Washington is probably ranked ahead of Oregon in game control is because they played a much tougher strength of schedule, the toughest in the country last year per ESPN, while Oregon played the 52nd. But you look at dominance and points per play and points per play margin, Oregon was actually quite ahead of Washington in those categories last season. But that's last season, not this season. All to say that Oregon looks like the better team than Illinois. I think in the first 10 minutes of this video, I've explained that pretty well using a variety of metrics, that they are the better team and they're at home. They're multiple time zones away. That's why Oregon is a big favorite here. But what's the path for Illinois to win? Or what is the path for Oregon to ensure total victory? Perhaps a dominant victory. I think that this relates to Illinois' passing offense, which has been the strength of the team all season long. It was why they were able to expose and exploit Nebraska's defense. It was, well, not in huge part as to why they beat Michigan, but Luke Altmaier was producing on the ground and making some throws through the air that had to count for something. It was why they were able to really pull away from Purdue, is Altmaier kept them in the game and his receivers kept Illinois in the game. So I would say, can Oregon and Tosh Lupoy and the Ducks defense, specifically the passing defense and the pass rush, Jordan Birch, Mateo Uyunglele, Titum Tuioti, Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Amari Washington, Keon War Hudson, Jaden Moore. What can they do? What can they do against Illinois' offensive line? And can they get pressure on Luke Altmaier? Illinois' offensive line has not been productive in pass protection. J.C. Davis, Melvin Priestley, Josh Geske, Josh Kreutz, and Zy Chrysler. On the season, Illinois has allowed 20 sacks. 20. And many more pressures. And the pockets have collapsed a lot more than 20 times. But Luke Altmaier has, well, he's an escape artist. He kind of reminds me a bit of, honestly, Stetson Bennett, in a sense. He's a very underrated quarterback. Occasionally he'll make a bad decision or two, much like Stetson Bennett did. And I don't know if Altmaier is ever going to be a highly touted NFL QB. I kind of doubt that. But that's not because of his play in college. He's an efficiency monster right now in college. He's averaging 8.3 yards per attempt, completing 65.9% of his passes, 1,506 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, 1 interception. And on the ground, he has 138 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2.3 yards per carry, and he has 37. His long of 37 is on the ground. I look at how he's been playing this season. He's an escape artist. He can scramble. He can make you pay there. He can also make you pay through the air, where he's very accurate and has a 15-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. He rarely puts the ball in harm's way. Again, sometimes he doesn't make a good decision. More often, he's limited by his supporting cast because this is one of the Big Ten's worst offensive lines, and it's not like Illinois has their 2022 defense. If they had the 2022 defense with this offense, they would be winning in a much more dominant fashion across the board. I don't know if they would have beaten Penn State. That game probably would have turned out somewhat similar, but they would be a much better team, trust me, if they had that 2022 defense, because that is much better than this defense, which is better than last year's defense. I think that Aaron Henry is, working through some things and improving the unit, and it's nice to see growth on defense and on offense, and also special teams if you're Illinois. And we'll get into the special team situation, because that's something that's fascinating with both of these teams. They both have some explosivity on special teams. I think Illinois is more reliable there. But anyway, I want to get back to this critical matchup. Quarterback, wide receiver, maybe tight end for Illinois, and the offensive line. How do they do against the defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back group for Oregon? This is just, I think it's going to be must-see TV, because Ohio State, who has a better offense than Illinois, I think mainly because of their wide receivers and their offensive line. They're way better at running back than Illinois is, but your offensive line in big games is what is going to make your rushing attack, unless you have Ashton Jeanty, Kenneth Walker, Barry Sanders, Derrick Henry. Unless you have some type of exceptional running back, your offensive line is what makes your rushing attack. It's just is what it is. And I think that Ohio State showed us in the same way that Oregon exposed Ohio State's defense a bit. And we all expected, I think even many Oregon fans expected, Ohio State's defense to be better than Oregon. So it was really shocking watching them just, embarrass Jim Knowles and Ohio State's defense, the Silver Bullets, on national TV. But Ohio State did a little bit of exposing for Oregon too. Will Howard had the best game of his career at Ohio State, and probably the best game of his entire collegiate career against Oregon's secondary. And he didn't take really any deep shots. So I'm curious to see how what is an underrated Illinois wide receiver group and a very efficient quarterback who has produced less turnovers than Will Howard has all season long, how do they do against Oregon's defense? Let's preview Illinois' offense and Oregon's defense quickly before moving on. Illinois is scoring right now 27 points per game, not counting their FCS opponent. That's 62nd nationally. Illinois typically only needs 12.8 yards to score a single point, yards per point. That's 33rd. You look at points per play. They're scoring 0.415 points per play. That's 51st. And they score about 2.8 offensive touchdowns per game, which is 78th. And they have 3.7 red zone scores per game, which is 24th. So they do kick quite a bit of field goals there, but that's not necessarily a huge problem because their special teams is pretty good. Illinois, they're 95th in yards per game offensively, only producing 345.5, and they average 5.3 yards per play, which is 77th. A lot of that has to do with their struggles to run the football, where they only average 3.7 yards per carry. That's 91st. But let's look at their passing offense, where they average 8.1 yards per pass attempt, which is 25th, and 12.8 yards per completion, which is 39th. They're top 20 in average team passer rating. They're top 25 in incompletions per game. They complete 63.52% of their passes, which is 45th. Their sack rate, by the way, they allow sacks on about 11.2% of their dropbacks, which is 128th. Imagine if Altmaier had a great to elite, like a top 20, top 15, even top 10 offensive line. I think that this offense would be producing at a much higher level. So that is a big question in this game, is how does Illinois' offense do in an environment like Autzen Stadium? Because even though it's going to be 12:30 p.m., a little bit early over there, local time, it will be loud. It will be the loudest stadium they have played in all season long, outside of maybe Penn State. Maybe. And I just say maybe because I think Penn State at night, and they did the mock whiteout environment, I think that's better than Autzen Stadium, but I haven't been to a Penn State night game. I haven't been to any game at Autzen Stadium, so I'm not exactly being objective there. That's just my take. But I know that Autzen, I think, is better built to contain noise than even Beaver Stadium is. It's one of the best built stadiums in all of college football when it comes to trapping noise. It's very loud. It's going to be a similar environment. I'm not even going to make a comparison. What Illinois will face in Autzen is going to be similar to what they faced in Beaver Stadium, where their offensive line gave up 7 sacks and more than 10 tackles for loss. Oregon's defense this season, they are only allowing 17 points per game, which is 11th, 0.266 opponent points per play, which is 12th. They are only allowing opponents to average 4.9 yards per play, which is 28th, and they're only allowing about 311.3 yards per game, which is 18th. So This is going to be an interesting matchup. This right here will decide the game. Let's break down the offenses some more, get to the defenses, and then talk about the coaching matchup, and of course, trench play and special teams. Because trench warfare, as we know, well, that really determines the Big Ten, and Oregon has been quite exceptional at that. Offensively, I would take Oregon everywhere. I don't think that's much of a question. I think they have the better quarterback, much better offensive line, deeper running back room, slightly better receiver room. I think they're better at tight end, too. I will say, though, that Illinois is close to Oregon at quarterback, starting wide receiver, really best two wide receivers. Oregon is far superior when you look at depth, and they're close at tight end. It's really the offensive line and the running back room where Oregon, without question, is the superior team. Luke Altmaier right now has 1,506 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, a pick, a 161.5 passer rating, and in QBR, he has a 72.5 rating, which is 33rd. You look at Dillon Gabriel, he has 2,080 passing yards. He's completing 77% of his throws, averaging 9.2 yards per pass attempt, 15 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a 172.7 passer rating, and he's 8th in QBR with an 84.4 quarterback efficiency rating. You look at the ground game for these two teams. Oregon has ran for 1,108 yards, averaging 4.5 yards per carry and 14 touchdowns on the year. They do not have the same caliber of rushing offense they did last season. It's not the same offensive line. It's not the same offense. Dare I say it's not even the same team, outside of maybe the interior of the D-line, where I think they are clearly better with Derek Harmon than they were last year. I think that Oregon of 2023 was a better team than this team is. Again, that's not purely objective because those teams will never be able to play, but looking at how 2023 Oregon functioned on offense, I can tell you with high degrees of confidence, I think that that offense would depant any defense in college football this season, and it would be ugly. Let's just put it that way. But this offense has the same ceiling in a lot of regards as last year's offense does. They're not going to hit it as often because Dillon Gabriel has some more limitations. The offensive line isn't as good. And Troy Franklin was awesome. Same with Bucky Irving. But Jordan James has done very well with 717 rushing yards this year, 8 rushing touchdowns, and 5.9 yards per carry. He had a big game against Ohio State. He had a big game against Oregon State. He's had big games and performances all season long and has came up clutch when needed, like against Boise State when he had a few big runs toward the end of the game to give Oregon the game-winning field goal. Noah Whittington backs him up, and he has over 200 rushing yards and a touchdown. Hopefully he continues to rebound from his injury that he suffered last season. You look at receiving for Oregon. Tez Johnson leads the team in receiving yards, backed up by Evan Stewart, Terrence Ferguson, Trayshawn Holden, and Kenyon Sadiq. All of those players have at least 170 receiving yards or more. Holden and Stewart each have 3 receiving touchdowns. Tez Johnson has 7 receiving touchdowns. Tez Johnson, by the way, is only averaging 9.4 yards per reception. That's pretty low for a guy with his type of speed, but that's because he has 57 receptions. Dillon Gabriel loves to target him, and Gabriel is, well, he's a check down merchant. And I think that also plays into Oregon's offense very well because they can save the deep shots for when they need to take them and for when they need to generate an explosive play because they have the speed, the athleticism. Gabriel has the accuracy to do that, and he also has the schemer and Will Stein to draw up a play that will work and play to the offense's strengths. But Oregon is so athletic at wide receiver, and their offensive line is really beginning to gel and get some downhill momentum such that they can just produce checkdowns all game long and still have touchdown drives. They can sustain those. Not every team can do that. A lot of teams have to mix in explosives, rely on some big plays to score touchdowns. Because as we all know, scoring in the red zone, well, that can be hard because the field condenses. It's harder for defenses to just get torched or give up a wide open deep route. You have to be more methodical and strategic. Oregon's so athletic and they're so good with the offensive minds that they have to where I don't think that's much of a problem with them. Against Ohio State, they were able to beat Ohio State with checkdowns and then use, I would say, their outside leverage, their inside leverage with the run, and just some of those short passes to really, I'd say, open up the deep ball. I wouldn't be shocked if Oregon tried to do that in this game as well. I really like Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden. I wonder if Trayshawn Holden will be playing in this game, but I don't think that it'll matter all that much because you have two really good receivers and then two good tight ends. Oregon this season's averaging 11.8 yards per completion, by the way. You look at Illinois here, and the Illini, they're averaging 12.6 yards per completion. That shows that Illinois is actually, well, they're attempting more deep shots. They are taking more risks down the field. This is something that I mentioned again just a few seconds ago. Oregon loves to feast on the short and intermediate pass, and outside of that Ohio State game and one play against UCLA where they ran a fake speed option for a deep pass for a touchdown, they don't attempt that many deep shots. They don't because they don't have to. So Illinois, meanwhile, I think that in this game they will have to take some deep shots. They will. They'll have to generate some explosive plays, and they'll have to score some touchdowns outside of the red zone if they want to win. Pat Bryant can help Illinois with that. He has 484 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns. He's averaging 15.6 yards per reception. Zachary Franklin, Colin Dixon, and Hank Beatty are other receivers that have at least 100 yards or more. On the ground, look for Caden Fagan and Josh McCray, who each have over 200 rushing yards and are averaging 4 yards per carry or more. They each have 3 rushing touchdowns. I'm curious to see how Illinois will run the ball, or if they can, because Oregon has played 2 games in a row against Michigan State, where Michigan State couldn't run the ball until garbage time, and against Ohio State, where outside of Travion Henderson's 2 big runs, Ohio State only averaged like 2 yards per carry, if not less. The Ducks have put up consistently numbers that suggest you cannot run the football on them, or that's not how you are going to beat this defense. So I'm fascinated to see how a team like Illinois, who is passing more because they have to, but still wants to be physical and run the football, I'm curious to see how they attack this Oregon defense. But I would take Oregon at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, the offensive line, etc. They're the much better offense than Illinois. Defensively, I think it's pretty much the same thing. I got to be honest. You look at these 2 defenses this season, and Illinois has 19 sacks, 17 passes defended, 8 interceptions, 10 forced fumbles, and 5 fumble recoveries. This is an Illinois defense that, in large degree, feasts off of turnovers. And Illinois beats you in these close games because you turn over the football, you cave, you mentally implode, and they don't. That's what they do, and a large part of that is on defense with players like Torrey Cox Jr., with Miles Scott and Xavier Scott. All those players I mentioned have 2 interceptions or more, and Miles Scott and Xavier Scott have 2 passes defended and also each have 1 forced fumble. Illinois safeties in particular, I do think are good. And I debated whether Illinois is better than Oregon at defensive back, and I think at forcing turnovers and making big plays they are, but Oregon's passing defense has just been better. It's been better this season. Illinois at times has gotten burned through the air, and they have not faced an Ohio State offense or anything, not anything close to it, because I think Penn State actually has a similar caliber of offense to Ohio State, but I don't think that Penn State has the same type of natural raw talent in the passing offense. Like, they don't have a Jeremiah Smith or an Emeka Egbuka, and they don't have the same type of pass protection that Will Howard does. I think that Penn State's offensive line is better, and if much better than Ohio State's at run blocking, but Ohio State has proven this year that they are one of the best pass blocking offensive line units in the country, and a part of that's due to their scheme and the RPO stuff they run and the mobility of Will Howard. But another aspect of that is Josh Simmons, before he got injured, and be praying that he heals. He's been elite, and Josh Fryer's been good. And I imagine that whoever's replacing Josh Simmons is also going to be a pretty good offensive tackle, at least in pass blocking. Oregon, though, I would take them at D-line, linebacker, and defensive back. You look at Oregon's defense, and they have 20 sacks, 5 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 29 passes defended. These defenses on the ground, Illinois is allowing opponents to run for 4.5 yards per carry, which is 88th. Oregon's allowing opponents to average 4.2 yards per carry, which is 59th. Keep in mind, though, that Oregon has played Ashton Jeanty, Travion Henderson, and Quinton Judkins. They faced some of the best running backs in the country. If you adjusted Oregon's schedule for rushing offenses faced, they'd have one of the toughest, if not perhaps the toughest strength of schedule in the country. They're doing a pretty good job of stopping the run outside of a few explosive plays. Oregon's only allowing opponents to run for 134.5 yards per carry, or just yards, not yards per carry, my apologies. And Illinois is allowing opponents to run for 161.3 rushing yards per game. You look on the pass defense side of things, Oregon is allowing 6.1 opponent yards per pass attempt and 10.1 opponent yards per completion. They're top 20 in both of those. Illinois is outside of the top 50 in both of those categories. And of course, scoring defense and points per play, that's really what matters most. Illinois is allowing 21.2 opponent points per game, which is 31st. Oregon's allowing 17 flat, which is 11th. The Fighting Illini are allowing 0.314 opponent points per play. Meanwhile, the Ducks are allowing 0.266. Ducks are top 15. Illinois is outside of the top 35 in those categories. So I think Oregon clearly has the better defense as well. In the trenches, I would pick Oregon. I think they have the better offensive line, the better defensive line. No more comments on that. As for special teams, I would take Illinois here. They're much higher than Oregon in special teams efficiency. I think that Oregon has some explosive talent, as the Boise State game showed, when it comes to kick returns and punt returns. And I do think that their kicking game is better than it was last season. They are 9 of 12 on field goals right now, 25 on 27 of extra points, and they've even made a field goal of 50 yards. That's from Andrew Boyle. However, Illinois has 2 really good kickers. David Alano's 12 of 15 on the season, 22 of 22 in extra points, and I think that their punting game is pretty good too, with punter Hugh Robinson. In coaching, I'd take Oregon everywhere. I don't think this is much of a debate. I think that Lanning is a better head coach than Brett Bielema. I think he's a better game manager than Brett Bielema, better recruiter, better CEO. Everything that goes into being a head coach, I think Lanning is better than Bielema. On the offensive staff, I would take Will Stein over Barry Looney Jr., and after the performance against Ohio State where they stifled that rushing attack, I'd take Tosh Lupoy over Aaron Henry, and I think Oregon is better conditioned and trained. Illinois is a very good staff. This is simply me saying to you, expressing to you that I think Oregon has a top 10 staff nationally. I don't know where I'd put Illinois, but it's certainly top 50, in the top third of the country, and probably higher than that. I'm just saying this off of the top of my head, and I don't want to say they're top 25, and then I happen to do research or something, and I'm like, oh, I actually think they're 40th. But both of these coaching staffs are good. I just think that Oregon's is better. In fact, clearly better. And this leads me to pick Oregon to cover and win by a score of 42-17. The Penn State-Illinois game, I think you can put in juxtaposition to what the outcome of this game is going to be, because I think that Penn State's defense is better than Oregon's. And at the same time, while I think that these offenses are similar between Oregon and Penn State, Oregon's offense has shown a much better ability to consistently score touchdowns, in my opinion. And I do think that with, well, the travel that Illinois is going to incur, that plays a factor in this. I don't think that Illinois is going to lay down and die, but I do think that this will be a higher scoring affair. It will feel similar at the end to Penn State versus Illinois, because I think that Oregon and Penn State are similar caliber teams. I think that Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State they're all very, very close. I disagree with the general power rating notion that many have out there where Ohio State should be favored over Oregon or Penn State by a touchdown. I think that's lunacy. Not because I think Ohio State's overrated, not at all. In fact, it's mostly because I think that Oregon and Penn State are underrated. I do think that, again, Oregon covers and they win 42-17, covering that 21.5-point spread. It will be competitive. I think it, again, will feel a lot like the Penn State-Illinois game, where it's close entering the half, and Oregon comes out guns blazing in the second half in the same way that Penn State did. I just think the difference is Penn State guns blazing is their defense shutting you down and their offense slowly chewing you up and spitting you out of their mouth. For Oregon, guns blazing is we're scoring quickly, failed the snap there. We're just scoring over and over and over and over again. I think that is what Oregon is at their peak, is a high-flying offensive team. Their identity is not in their defense. It's not even, I think it is in their strength and toughness, but not in what many would consider a Big Ten way. It's almost more of an SEC way, where, Georgia, they didn't always show you how tough they were under Smart when they won those titles by just running the ball in your face. It was, it was really honestly through the passing game a lot of the times with Stetson Bennett and how efficient they were there, and the yards after contact and the stiff arms and the good pass protection, and then the pressure that they would get from guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and those type of players with their awesome defensive front and how they recruit well there. That's what Oregon comes across to me as. So they aren't the standard Big Ten team, but they fit well in the Big Ten, if that makes sense. Like, they can win the Big Ten. They, I think, should be favored to win the Big Ten as of right now, and I think they lead the Big Ten right now. But because of where Lanning came from, they operate differently. So I hope that makes sense. That's my prediction, 42-17. This is going to feel exactly like that Illinois-Penn State game, except it's going to be higher scoring because I think, again, Penn State is the better defense, especially after halftime adjustments are made. And offensively, I think Oregon's slightly better than Penn State on offense. And especially that is the case when you look at how they score touchdowns. And when Penn State and Oregon are high-flying and operating at their peak, Penn State wants to suffocate you. They want to game control you to death. Oregon, they want to do that exact same thing, but not in the way that you and I think of when we think of suffocating and game control. They want to do that by putting the game out of your reach, scoring-wise, and scoring explosive plays and just punishing you via the box score. So Oregon wins, they cover, and they remain at number 1 entering next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Khalil OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go Ducks, and go Fighting Illini.